In Harry's first year at Hogwarts, Dumbledore and Harry stood together before the Mirror of Erised, a magical object that shows the viewer the deepest desire of their heart with absolute and merciless accuracy. Harry saw his dead parents. He asked Dumbledore what the mirror showed him. Dumbledore said he saw himself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. He was lying. J.K. Rowling confirmed publicly, in a 2007 interview with Bloomsbury Publishing, what Dumbledore actually saw in that mirror. He saw his family, his mother Kendra, his sister Ariana, his brother Aberforth, from whom he had been estranged for decades. He saw them alive. He saw Aberforth looking at him without contempt. He saw a version of his family that had not been broken by the specific tragedy that he had spent his entire adult life believing was, at least in part, his fault. He chose not to share this with an 11-year-old boy who had just seen his own dead parents for the first time. Perhaps that was a reasonable choice. Children do not always need to carry adult grief. But it established a pattern that would define every interaction Dumbledore had with Harry for the remaining 6 years of his life. When given the choice between transparency and the management of information, Dumbledore managed information. Always, without exception. Secret 2. The Greater Good. In the summer of his 18th year, newly graduated from Hogwarts and trapped in Godric's Hollow, caring for his damaged sister and his distant brother, Albus Dumbledore met Gellert Grindelwald. Grindelwald had been expelled from Durmstrang for his experimental and dangerous magical work. He was staying nearby with his great-aunt, the Tilda Bagshot. They were, by all accounts, immediately and completely captivated by each other. What they built together over the course of that summer was not simply a friendship, it was a political philosophy. The phrase they chose for it was, "for the greater good." The substance of it was the following. Wizards were inherently superior to Muggles. Muggles were inherently dangerous to themselves and to the magical world. Therefore, wizards should rule. Not cruelly, they told each other. Not in the manner of Voldemort's later movement. Benevolently. As shepherds rather than masters. The Muggles would be guided, protected from themselves, and the wizarding world would finally operate openly, free from the international statute of secrecy that had kept it hidden for centuries. Albus Dumbledore, the man who would later become the most celebrated defender of Muggle rights in wizarding history, spent an entire summer designing a system of Muggle subjugation with one of the most dangerous dark wizards who ever lived. He never told Harry this. He never told the Order of the Phoenix. The world learned it only because a biographer named Rita Skeeter spent 3 months digging through documents that should have been sealed. Secret 3. The Blood Pact. Grindelwald left Godric's Hollow in the late summer following Ariana's death. He and Dumbledore parted without ever formally facing each other. Grindelwald went on to build a movement that terrorized the European wizarding world for 2 decades. Dumbledore went on to become Transfiguration Professor at Hogwarts and then Deputy Headmaster. For nearly 30 years, Dumbledore did nothing about Grindelwald. The wizarding community found this inexplicable. Here was a man regarded universally as the only wizard Grindelwald feared. The one person with the power and the knowledge to confront the rising dark movement and end it. And he taught Transfiguration and stayed at Hogwarts and did not intervene. The Fantastic Beasts films revealed what the archive had long suspected. There was a blood pact. Early in their friendship, before the disaster of that summer, Dumbledore and Grindelwald had made a magical binding agreement never to fight each other. It was sealed in blood and was not easily dissolved. But the full weight of that delay requires stating clearly. For 28 years, while Grindelwald's forces grew and spread, and people suffered and died across Europe, Dumbledore waited. He had reasons. The pact, the grief over Ariana, perhaps the lingering shadow of what they had once planned together. None of his reasons changed the body count. He never explained the full nature of this delay to anyone. Secret 4. Ariana. Ariana Dumbledore died during a three-way duel between Albus, Aberforth and Grindelwald in the summer of 1919. She was not a combatant. She was a damaged and vulnerable young woman who had spent years unable to control her own magic and who attempted to intervene in a fight between her brothers and their houseguest. The secret is this: no one knows which spell killed her. Not Albus, not Aberforth. The duel was chaotic and the magic was crossing from 3 separate wands, and Ariana was caught inside it. And when it was over, she was dead. And none of the 3 people present knew who was responsible. Albus Dumbledore carried the possibility that he killed his own sister every day for the remaining 115 years of his life. This is not metaphor. This is the specific torment he described in private correspondence that reached the archive. He did not know. He would never know. And the not knowing was, by his own account, worse than certainty of guilt would have been. He never told Harry this. He never told anyone. The world knew Ariana had died. The cause was listed as accidental magical discharge. The details remained sealed. Secret 5. He knew about Harry from the beginning. On the night of the 31st of October, 1981, Rubeus Hagrid arrived at the ruins of a house in Godric's Hollow and retrieved a baby from the rubble. He brought that baby to Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore held a 1-year-old child who had survived the killing curse and left him on a doorstep in Surrey. When exactly did Dumbledore realize that Harry Potter was a Horcrux? The archive's conclusion, based on the internal evidence of the texts, is substantially earlier than Dumbledore ever acknowledged. The Horcrux theory required understanding 3 things: that Voldemort had created Horcruxes, that the killing curse rebounded from Harry and tore a fragment of Voldemort's soul free, and that this fragment embedded itself in the only living vessel available. Dumbledore had been studying Voldemort's psychology and magic for decades. He understood what Horcruxes were before most witches and wizards had ever heard the word. The evidence strongly suggests that by the time Harry arrived at Hogwarts, and possibly from the night in Godric's Hollow itself, Dumbledore knew or suspected what Harry carried inside him. He spent 6 years sending Harry into increasingly dangerous situations without telling him. He built a relationship of trust and affection between them, and he kept this specific knowledge carefully sealed in a pensive memory, to be delivered by a dead man's instructions at the moment when Harry would have no time left to refuse. Secret 6. The prophecy was not about protection. Most people know the prophecy. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. What most people do not know is how long Dumbledore sat with this prophecy and what conclusions he drew from it before sharing any of them with Harry. Trelawney delivered the prophecy to Dumbledore in a job interview in the spring of 1980. Voldemort fell in October 1981. Harry arrived at Hogwarts in September 1991. He was told the full text of the prophecy in the summer after his 5th year, 1996. Dumbledore held the complete text of the prophecy for 16 years before telling Harry. For 16 years, Harry trained and fought and bled and lost people who mattered to him, operating without the single most important piece of information about his own life. Dumbledore made this choice. He made it deliberately, and defended it afterward on grounds of Harry's psychological readiness. The archive notes that psychological readiness is a determination made most easily by the person who controls the information. Secret 7. Snape's complete mission. Dumbledore constructed Severus Snape's role as a double agent with extraordinary precision. Snape was to maintain Voldemort's trust at all costs, protect Harry when possible, and ultimately deliver a single piece of information at the moment Dumbledore's death made it safe to do so. The information was this: Harry Potter had to die. Not as a possibility, not as one of several strategic options, as a certainty, as the only path to Voldemort's defeat. Harry had to walk into the forest and allow himself to be killed. Dumbledore had known this for years. He had calculated it, confirmed it through his progressive destruction of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and constructed the entire architecture of Harry's final year around it. He told Snape. He did not tell Harry. He told Snape specifically so that Snape could tell Harry at the last possible moment, using a pensive memory delivered in circumstances where Harry would be alone, terrified, and without any meaningful choice about what to do with the information. There would be no time for refusal, no time for grief, no time for any response other than compliance. Snape, who had spent 17 years living a double life at mortal risk for Dumbledore's plan, was not even told the reason Harry had to die until he explicitly asked. Dumbledore confirmed it as if sharing a minor administrative detail. The boy had to die. Had Snape not asked the right question at the right moment, he might never have known at all. Secret 8. The Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore knew about the Deathly Hallows for most of his life. As a young man, he and Grindelwald had been obsessed with them. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Invisibility Cloak. Together they constituted the Deathly Hallows, and according to legend, the wizard who united all three would become the Master of Death. Harry's Invisibility Cloak had been in Dumbledore's possession since the night the Potters died. He held it for 10 years before returning it to Harry in his first Christmas at Hogwarts, wrapped in a note with no signature. He never explained why he had kept it. He never told Harry it was one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. He never told Harry that the Resurrection Stone was embedded in the ring Horcrux that had cursed and eventually killed him. He allowed Harry to spend the entirety of his 7th year pursuing Horcruxes without knowing that the Hallows existed, or that 3 of the most powerful magical objects in history were functionally within his reach. Dumbledore understood the Hallows. He understood that the Invisibility Cloak was not simply a family heirloom. He understood what uniting the 3 meant. He chose to allow Harry to discover all of this through desperate research in the middle of a war, rather than simply explaining it at any point during the 6 years they spent together. Secret 9. The Hand. In Harry's 6th year, Dumbledore arrived at the start of term with a hand that was blackened and dead, and clearly the result of something catastrophic. He told Harry that he would explain. He did not explain, not fully, not until it served a specific instructional purpose. What actually happened was this. Dumbledore had found the Gaunt family ring. He recognized it as a Horcrux. He destroyed it. And then, because the Resurrection Stone was embedded inside it, and because Dumbledore had spent 67 years wondering whether his sister's death was his fault, he put the ring on his finger before ensuring the curse was neutralized. He put the ring on because he wanted to use the Resurrection Stone. He wanted to see Ariana. He wanted to see his family. The greatest wizard of the age, who had spent decades warning others about the dangers of dwelling on the dead, was so compromised by his own grief that he activated a cursed Horcrux ring without adequate precaution. The curse would have killed him within minutes without Snape's intervention. Instead, it was contained to his hand and placed him on a timeline of roughly a year. He knew from that moment forward that he was dying. He told Snape. He did not tell Harry. Secret 10. He volunteered to be the Potter's secret keeper. The night before James and Lily Potter went into hiding under the Fidelius charm, Dumbledore offered to be their secret keeper himself. He made the offer. He was, by any rational assessment, the most secure choice available. Voldemort feared him. No Death Eater was capable of extracting information from Albus Dumbledore. The Potters would have been unassailable. James and Lily declined. They chose Peter Pettigrew. They chose Pettigrew on the reasoning that he was such an unlikely choice that Voldemort would never suspect him. It was, from a certain angle, logical. It was also catastrophically wrong. The secret Dumbledore kept was not that he made the offer. The secret was what he knew about Pettigrew and chose not to share. There is no evidence in the surviving record that Dumbledore suspected Pettigrew specifically. But the archive notes that Dumbledore had spent years studying Voldemort's methods, and the pattern of infiltrating trusted circles through minor and overlooked figures was not new. Whether Dumbledore failed to see the risk in Pettigrew or saw it and said nothing is a question the archive cannot fully resolve. What is certain is that he held back his assessment and the Potters died. Secret 11. He kept Harry inside the Dursleys' house deliberately. Every summer of Harry's Hogwarts career, Dumbledore sent him back to Privet Drive. The stated reason was the blood protection Lily's sacrifice had created, tied to Petunia's roof as long as Harry could call it home. This was true, and it was real, and it functioned as described. It was not the only reason. Dumbledore needed Harry to be isolated, controlled, and psychologically dependent on Hogwarts as the site of all safety and warmth and belonging. A Harry who spent summers surrounded by friends and the magical world would have developed networks, independence, and the kind of confidence that asks questions rather than accepting instructions. A Harry returning to a cupboard under the stairs every summer would arrive at Hogwarts each September, grateful and compliant, and deeply attached to the one place and the one person that made him feel like he mattered. Dumbledore was that person by careful design. The mentor relationship was real, the affection was real, and it was constructed, deliberately and systematically, around a child who had been made vulnerable enough to need it. Secret 12. Grindelwald. Everything else in this record flows from this. This is the thing Dumbledore never explained, never fully acknowledged, and never allowed the wizarding world to examine clearly. He loved Gellert Grindelwald. Not abstractly, not as a philosophical ally or an intellectual match. He loved him in the way that changes a person permanently, in the way that creates a before and an after, with nothing able to fully bridge the gap between them. Dumbledore was 18. Grindelwald was the first person who had ever seemed to him a true equal. Their 2 months together in Godric's Hollow were, by Dumbledore's own account in documents the archive has reviewed, the most intellectually and personally alive he had ever felt. Ariana's death ended it. The love did not end with it. For the next 3 decades, as Grindelwald built a movement that killed thousands, Dumbledore was paralyzed by the Blood Pact, and by something the Blood Pact alone cannot fully explain. He was incapable of raising his wand against someone he had loved. He was incapable of accepting that the brilliant young man in Godric's Hollow had become something that needed to be destroyed. When he finally fought Grindelwald in 1945, the duel lasted only a few hours and Dumbledore won. He imprisoned Grindelwald in Nurmengard rather than executing him. Grindelwald had built the prison himself. Dumbledore placed the man he had loved inside the structure his cruelty had created, and then he locked the door and returned to England, and never publicly discussed what he felt. Voldemort visited Nurmengard in 1998, 53 years after the battle, seeking the Elder Wand. Grindelwald refused to give it. Voldemort killed him. The man who had terrorized Europe for 2 decades died protecting the location of a wand from the next Dark Lord. Why he refused is unclear. The archive has its suspicions. Dumbledore was already dead by then. He did not know whether Grindelwald kept that last secret as an act of redemption or simply from pride. He took his uncertainty with him into whatever comes after. 12 secrets, 12 decisions to withhold. The simplest interpretation is that Dumbledore was a calculating man who used people, including children, as instruments of a plan he considered too important to compromise with transparency. This interpretation has evidence. The more complicated interpretation is that Dumbledore was a man who had been catastrophically wrong once before, who had watched his own certainty destroy his family, who spent the rest of his very long life trying to construct a plan that could not fail regardless of what he told people, because he did not trust himself to tell people the right things at the right time without his own flawed heart interfering. Both interpretations are supported by the record. What is certain is this: a boy named Harry Potter walked into a forest at the age of 17, in the dark, in winter, to allow himself to be killed. He did this because a man he trusted had arranged, over the course of 17 years, for that to be the only choice available. The plan worked. Voldemort died. The war ended. The history books called Dumbledore the greatest wizard who ever lived. The archive is still reviewing the file. There is one thing that does not appear anywhere in the official record of Albus Dumbledore's life. It does not appear in the books that were written about him. It does not appear in the eulogies delivered after his death on top of the astronomy tower. It does not appear in the portrait that now hangs in the headmaster's office, which speaks in his voice and offers advice to those who ask for it. No one ever asked Dumbledore whether he thought he deserved to be trusted. Hermione Granger, in the weeks after his death, expressed doubt about his methods openly and repeatedly. Ron Weasley told her she was being disrespectful. Harry eventually silenced the conversation himself because he needed to believe in Dumbledore in order to walk into that forest. But Hermione's question was the right question, and the portrait cannot answer it. The portrait can only repeat what the man chose to say when he was alive, and the man chose very carefully. The archive has reviewed the complete record. The conclusion it has reached is not flattery, and it is not condemnation. It is a question that has no comfortable answer. How many people had to not know things so that the plan could work? The archive remains open.